The judge thought he was about to crush a foolish teenager, but within minutes he realized he was facing something far more dangerous, a genius in disguise. The Los Angeles County Courthouse buzzed with low whispers. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. Reporters sat scribbling in the back rows. Families of other defendants leaned forward with curiosity, and officers of the court shifted in their seats. Everyone's eyes were locked on one figure at the defense table. 19-year-old Jalen Dawson stood there, hands buried in his hoodie pockets, chin lifted with quiet defiance. The table beside him looked oversized, like it belonged to someone older, more seasoned. But Jalen didn't flinch. He was accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. Serious charges, charges that could lock him away for years. And yet the way he carried himself suggested he wasn't afraid. At the bench sat Judge Walter Grayson, a man whose reputation was as polished as the mahogany gavel in his hand, and twice as unforgiving. He leaned back, peering over his glasses at Jalen with a look that wasn't just dismissive, it was mocking. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the bench as if this whole ordeal was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "So," the judge said, lips curling into a smirk, "you think you're some kind of legal expert, kid? This isn't debate club." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff chuckled. The stenographer cracked a grin. Even the prosecutor smirked like he was already celebrating victory. To them, this was a joke, a young man foolish enough to land himself in deep trouble, about to be chewed up by the justice system. But Jalen didn't laugh, not even close, because he had been waiting for this moment, though not exactly in this way, for most of his life. While other kids memorized basketball stats, Jalen was memorizing case law. While his friends played video games, he was running mock trials in his head, arguing with imaginary prosecutors, dismantling imaginary evidence. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years. She came home with stories of crooked shortcuts, arrogant prosecutors, and defense attorneys who gave up too easily. Jalen absorbed every detail. By 14, he could break down a trial better than most law students. By 17, he could win arguments against adults twice his age. But none of that mattered to Judge Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another troubled kid, another file in the stack of endless cases. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the file. "I've got a golf game at 2. The crowd chuckled again. But this time, Jalen's lips curved ever so slightly into a smirk, because the judge had already made his first mistake, treating the case like a nuisance instead of justice. And Jalen was ready to exploit every mistake. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, rose with the arrogance of a man who believed the fight was already won. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, his tone rehearsed. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6 reported missing only hours earlier. Officers pursued him through downtown Los Angeles. He attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence speaks for itself." The words landed with weight. The gallery buzzed with murmurs. It sounded damning. It sounded like Jalen didn't stand a chance. Judge Grayson nodded lazily. "Go on." The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury box. "The defense may try to convince you this was all a misunderstanding, but let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The laughter from before was gone. Now the courtroom was tense, eyes darting between the prosecutor and the young man at the defense table. Carrington flipped through his papers with confidence. "Your Honor, we have the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally saw the defendant behind the wheel before his arrest. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Judge Grayson nodded again. "Sounds straightforward to me." It did sound straightforward. To everyone in the room, the case looked sealed. But Jalen wasn't like everyone else. He didn't just see the surface. He saw the cracks forming beneath. When it was time for the defense to respond, all eyes turned to the nervous public defender assigned to Jalen, Lisa Thornton. She rose slowly, clutching her notes. "Your Honor, my client—" But Jalen placed a steady hand on her arm. She froze, confused. Then, silently, she sat back down. For the first time, Jalen spoke. His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "Your Honor, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington crossed his arms. "Go ahead. You said Officer Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" "That's right," Carrington replied quickly. "And that testimony is in his written report?" "Of course it is." Jalen nodded slowly, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." The room stirred. Grayson narrowed his eyes. On what grounds? Jalen pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time, gesturing toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." The gallery gasped. Carrington's smug expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Jalen took another step forward. "If the court allows, I'd like to request Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report is accurate, it should match his location history. But," he let the word hang, "I have a feeling it won't." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Carrington stammered. "Your Honor, while we wait for GPS records, the fact remains the defendant's fingerprints were found on the stolen car's steering wheel." Jalen nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. My prints were there." The jury leaned forward. Even the judge tilted his head slightly, curious. "But does touching something make you a criminal?" The words sliced through the silence like a blade. And for the first time, the jury looked unsure. The trial was no longer a formality. It was a battlefield, and Jalen had just fired the first shot.
The jury exchanged nervous glances. The gallery buzzed with whispers. For the first time, the mighty weight of the state's case against Jalen didn't look unshakable. The prosecutor, Carrington, shifted uncomfortably behind his stack of papers. His voice, once sharp and confident, had softened around the edges. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us not forget the defendant's fingerprints were on the stolen Audi. That is irrefutable proof." Jalen tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "Proof of what, counselor?" His voice was steady, calm, like a chess player studying the board. "That I touched the car? That I leaned against it? That I made the mistake of opening an unlocked door? Or proof that I stole it?" The room went still. A few jurors leaned forward instinctively, their curiosity piqued. Jalen pressed on, his words sharp and deliberate. "Let's think about it logically. You go into a store, you try on a jacket, put your hands in the pockets, then put it back. Hours later, someone steals that same jacket. Are you suddenly guilty of theft because your fingerprints are on it?" Someone in the gallery let out a surprised laugh. Others whispered, nodding to each other. For the first time, the tide of the courtroom conversation shifted toward him. Judge Grayson raised a brow, tapping his pen against the bench. He hadn't expected this. Carrington tried to recover. "Your Honor, this circumstances—" But Jalen wasn't done. He took another step forward, his eyes locked on the jury. "Let's think about it logically. You go into a store, you try on a jacket, put your hands in the pockets, then put it back. Hours later, someone steals that same jacket. Are you suddenly guilty of theft because your fingerprints are on it?" The murmurs grew louder now. Even Judge Grayson shifted in his seat, as though he wasn't sure whether to scold Jalen or admit he had a point. Carrington's face flushed with frustration. "This is nothing but distraction, Your Honor. The defendant is twisting facts to confuse the jury." But Jalen didn't need to raise his voice. His calm precision was more devastating than any outburst. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I ask, Was the forensic specialist who processed my fingerprints subpoenaed to testify today? The question seemed simple, but its impact was seismic. Judge Grayson blinked, caught off guard. His eyes flicked towards Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated. He shuffled his papers again. Finally, with reluctant annoyance, he muttered, "No." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jalen's lips pressed together in a faint smile, not of triumph, but of certainty. "So let me understand this correctly. The state wants to use forensic evidence against me, but they didn't think it necessary to bring in the actual expert who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, no chance to question the chain of custody, no chance to challenge accuracy, just trust us." The words hit harder than any outburst could. Carrington's jaw tightened. This is absurd. Is it? Or is it dangerous? The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. Judge Grayson sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. For the first time that day, he looked weary, not with the boy before him, but with the case itself. But Jalen wasn't finished, not even close, because what he was about to reveal would flip the entire trial upside down. He stepped closer to the bench, his voice steady. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle." Grayson frowned. "The owner?" "Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi. He gave a statement to police the night the car was stolen, a statement mysteriously left out of the prosecution's filings." All eyes turned towards Carrington. His face had gone pale. He knew exactly what Jalen was about to say. Jalen didn't wait for permission. He pulled out a transcript and read it aloud. "This is from the original police report, the same report the prosecution conveniently forgot to mention, the same report the arresting officer left out of his testimony. And yet they want you to believe, beyond a reasonable doubt, that I am guilty." The jury was shaken. The gallery buzzed like a hive. Jalen turned back to Judge Grayson. His tone sharpened, no longer calm, but cutting. "Your Honor, I was arrested blocks from where the car was abandoned, walking home with snacks in my hand. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and dangerous assumptions." For a long moment, the courtroom was silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Jalen. Judge Grayson leaned back, exhaling slowly. His pen tapped against the desk again, but this time without rhythm. His gaze flicked towards Carrington. "Counselor, do you have anything further?" Carrington's mouth opened, then closed again. His face was flushed red with frustration. "No, Your Honor." The words landed like a gavel strike. Jalen's heart hammered in his chest, but his face remained calm. He had spent years studying prosecutors, memorizing their tactics, predicting their moves, and he knew the truth. When a prosecutor started scrambling, it wasn't because their case was strong, it was because it was falling apart. Judge Grayson rubbed his temple, eyes still fixed on Jalen. He looked at him not with mockery anymore, but with something harder to define. Curiosity, maybe? Even respect. And in that moment, Jalen realized he had done more than defend himself. He had made the system hesitate. But the fight wasn't over, not yet. The prosecution had lost control of the narrative, but the stakes were still high. He could feel it, the tension in the room, the weight of every eye fixed on him. Because the truth was clear now. This wasn't just a trial. It was a test. A test of whether one teenager's knowledge and courage could stand against a system built to crush him. And as the judge prepared to deliver his decision, Jalen braced himself, because the next words spoken in that courtroom would change his life forever.
The silence inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse was heavy, almost unbearable. The jurors shifted in their seats, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The gallery buzzed with nervous whispers that quickly died down whenever Judge Grayson's gavel tapped against the bench.
And at the center of it all, 19-year-old Jalen Dawson stood tall, calm, steady, no longer just a defendant. The courtroom had started the day mocking him, laughing at him, but now no one dared. Even the judge wasn't smiling anymore. Carrington, the prosecutor, shuffled his notes desperately, his once polished voice cracking with frustration. "Your Honor, the defendant, he's twisting evidence. He's trying to turn this into a circus." But his words were weak, empty. Everyone in that room could feel it. The case had slipped through his fingers like sand, and there was no catching it now. Jalen let the silence stretch before stepping forward once more. "Your Honor, if this case is built on testimony from an officer who wasn't even on duty, fingerprints processed by a specialist who isn't here to testify, and a police report that conveniently erased the owner's original statement." He paused, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Then this isn't a case at all. It's an attempt to convict someone because he looks like a suspect." The words hit hard. They landed heavier than any legal argument could. The gallery erupted, shouts, gasps, murmurs of agreement. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens barely keeping up. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" The chaos simmered, but the damage was already done. Jalen's words had pierced through every layer of doubt. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Judge Grayson leaned forward, staring at Jalen for what felt like an eternity. His voice was slower now, heavier, stripped of the mockery it once carried. "Case dismissed." For one suspended second, no one moved. The words hung in the air, shocking, undeniable. Then chaos erupted again. Half the courtroom erupted in disbelief, the other half in applause. Reporters jumped to their feet, cameras flashing like lightning. Some spectators shook their heads in anger, others nodded in relief. Jalen didn't move. He stood still, letting the weight of the words sink in, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. Judge Grayson gripped his gavel tightly, his expression unreadable. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes. There was something else, something closer to recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen finally turned to leave, his hoodie pulled over his head. He had no interest in basking in the chaos. This victory wasn't about proving how clever he was. It was about survival, about justice. But just as he reached the door, Judge Grayson's voice stopped him. "Mr. Dawson." Jalen paused but didn't turn. The judge hesitated, his lips pressed tight. Finally he spoke. "You should consider law school." For the first time all day, Jalen allowed himself a real smile. "Already on my way, Your Honor." Outside the courthouse, the chaos was even louder. Reporters swarmed the steps like bees, microphones thrust into his face, cameras flashing nonstop. "Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? How does it feel to outsmart a prosecutor? What are you going to do next?" Jalen ignored them all, pulling his hoodie tighter. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need the headlines. This wasn't about becoming famous. This was about truth. And the truth was, for every Jalen Dawson who managed to fight back, there were countless others who couldn't. At the bottom of the steps, his mother Denise Dawson waited, arms crossed, eyes sharp. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then finally, she shook her head and exhaled. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Jalen chuckled softly, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She studied him for another second before pulling him into a tight hug. "You were always the stubborn one." The cameras kept flashing, the reporters kept shouting, but in that moment, none of it mattered.
The only thing that mattered was the warmth of his mother's arms and the knowledge that, for once, the system hadn't won. Across the street, Judge Grayson lingered by his car. His posture wasn't the same as it had been inside the courtroom. The arrogance was gone, his shoulders were heavier, his eyes distant, thoughtful. He hadn't expected this trial to be anything more than routine, another young defendant, another easy conviction, another file checked off before his golf game. But now, he knew this case would haunt him, because Jalen had forced the system to look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. But the victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like revelation. How many others had stood in that same courtroom, accused with flimsy evidence? How many had been convicted, not because of truth, but because of assumptions, shortcuts, and bias? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the kids who didn't? What about the ones who never grew up learning case law at their mother's kitchen table? What about the ones who never got the chance? He thought of all the names, all the stories lost to silence, and he knew this couldn't be the end of his fight. It had to be the beginning. Later that night, long after the reporters had gone, Jalen sat in his small bedroom, stacks of law books on the floor, sticky notes covering the walls. His mind was already racing. This courtroom wouldn't be the last he stood in. But next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He would be the attorney. And he wouldn't stand alone. This wasn't just Jalen's victory. It was a glimpse into something bigger. The cracks in a justice system that too often values convenience over truth, assumptions over evidence. The real question isn't how Jalen won. The real question is, how many others never get the chance to fight back? If this story made you think, even for a moment, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Because justice only changes when we demand it. And who knows, the next time someone like Jalen stands in a courtroom, it might not be a story on the news. It might be someone you know.